Our guest this evening is a global force in design and a visionary whose fingerprints are on some of the most iconic vehicles of the last 2 decades. From Jeep to Chrysler to Rivian, he's not only shaped how we move through the world, but how we feel doing it. He's at the leading edge of the future of transportation, inspiring how families move, explore new frontiers, and push the boundaries of innovation and sustainability. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the Chief Design Officer of Rivian, Jeff Hammond.
That's way too kind of an introduction, but thank you.
At some point in your career, you're going to have to accept it. Jeff, thank you for joining us. I'd love to start by sharing your story from the very beginning. Tell us about the early years of growing up in Canada and what first sparked your love of cars and design.
Yeah, so my parents were immigrants. They moved from Lebanon to Canada. And if anyone spent any time in the Middle East, you know that there's a big affinity for German cars. So my dad brought some of that affinity back with him and grew up with a lot of different cars that I guess weren't typical during that time frame. My dad I still remember he had some of the cars he had. It was like a 740 GLE, he had an Audi 5000, and then got into his Mercedes phase. And I specifically remember one of the ones he bought that I was just in love with was it was a Mercedes. It was a 88. It was a 560 SL in smoke silver. My dad was also a tinkerer. He didn't like the European headlamp. He didn't like the American headlamps because they had round circles and it was just for North American market. And I remember he changed to the rectangular ones from Europe. So
Nice.
I don't know if these are things that connected with me, but I still just remember for me it was just being able to like sit in those cars. Like I got obsessed with the smell of them, or just going on drives with my dad. It was just even just going to local things, or we'd also spend time going to the Toronto Auto Show. And I just, from a very young age, I was obsessed with cars, watching Knight Rider. So it's another thing that you probably saw in Rivian. A little bit of fun I had there, and Dukes of Hazzard and things like that. I was just automatically just in love with cars.
So my father was an amateur rally car driver when I was growing up, so it was very similar. Like it was the smell of, just gasoline and nights hanging out in the garage where my father was under the hood of a car tinkering about, and it does
Sounds a
create
lot
passion.
cooler.
Um, so, one of the things when we had spoke, you said that your dad used to have this coffee table about the Mercedes cars and the collections, and you yourself were an artist who loved to draw at a very young age. Uh, what drew you to the design of drawing cars? And was it those books that inspired the shape and the style? Did you carry any of it forward?
Well, it was actually so my dad would get these magazines that came from Mercedes. They were just some sort of, so I think they just gave it to him because he bought the cars. And I remember they would come through, and that was the exact color and combination. I had to find one with the European headlights. So it was a little bit of digging on Google. But he had these magazines that came in and they had like little things around Mercedes. I remember there was a part, I mean, like I said, I loved drawing, I loved cars. And there was this section of there's that some students would actually put in, or kids would put in drawings, and I saw drawings of these cars. So I actually submitted a drawing, or I remember like mailing it into this thing. But then there was also this section on one of the head of design at the time, Bruno Sacco, and I was talking about design, and I remember like talking about this with my parents, and it just became a thing, and I didn't even know what it was a thing. It was like, hey, it was like 6 years old. I'm like, I want to be a car designer.
6 years old. That's amazing. So you follow that passion. You eventually go to the College of Creative Studies in Detroit, just over the border, a legendary training ground for transportation designers. And what was that experience like? And were there any mentors there or influences that you carried with you forward?
Yeah, it was funny growing up in Canada. I knew that to be an automotive designer, that I meant I was going to leave Canada. So I just knew that this wasn't my forever place, and I was going to move. I would also say, just being an artist, and I wouldn't say I was a popular kid in high school at all. But I remember going to my first day at CCS. I specifically remember going there and just seeing car drawings everywhere, and like everybody was talking about cars. It was a transportation program, and then like everybody were artists with like very similar backgrounds and histories, and immediately felt like, oh my God, I found my people. I found where I belong. And anyone who knows a lot about the different art schools, specifically like in auto design, I would say, and maybe that's not true today as much as it was when I went to school, but you really, I guess probably some of it is, you learned a lot from your upperclassmates. Like they were the benchmark. You'd see what your upperclassmates would do. You'd be looking online and seeing what some of the other schools were doing, and you quickly knew what the benchmark was for design and illustrations. But really, a lot of things you learned from was there was teachers, at least at CCS, that would come from the auto companies, and they teach Viscom classes, and they're usually something you learned at night. It was from like 6 to 9 p.m. It was 3 hours or so, where some designer from one of the, Ford, GM, Chrysler would come in and they'd do little demos, or they'd take your sketch and draw over top of them. And you'd meet some amazing artists. Like I'm sorry, I'm going to forget the guy's name, but there was this one gentleman that came in, and it was a Korean designer, and he would basically the way he would draw was just insane. Like you'd see these things. We got to like spend time with like another gentleman who's really well known in our industry, like Sung Paik, who does gorgeous illustrations. And it's like you'd watch it and be like a skeptical to watch, but as a student, I'm like, I can't do this. I remember this one guy that he'd sit there and he'd do that. This guys was talking about. He'd draw, and when you're drawing a wheel, you have to kind of draw the outside of the tire, the inside part of the tire, the rim, and then the inside of the rim. And he would just sit there. You'd see him. He'd kind of rotate his hand just for a little bit, kind of get a warm up, and then he'd just go, and it'd be like perfect ellipses. And he said, "It's like, how did he do this? He learned from one of the teachers told him during a crit was like, you don't know how to draw ellipses." So he spent the entire summer just practicing ellipses, and he was amazing at it. Not something that I could probably do, but I remember there was a gentleman actually, by the name Jim Fleming. He's still at GM, and he took one of my drawings and overlaid it. And I saw how he was just like rotating the paper and kind of using multiple lines to draw it. And it just like, it was one of those things where it was like, I was struggling, like learning how to kind of communicate and draw with a car. And the second he did that, it was like, it's like a light switch went off, and I just learned how to draw. I was with other Viscom classes, and it wasn't things I could emulate, but just having him take my drawing and overlay it was something that like I really remember, and it kind of stuck with me.
What an amazing opportunity. So you graduate CCS and you find yourself at Chrysler right out of school. What was it like stepping from college and into industry at such an iconic brand?
Well, one part that I skipped at CCS is actually my teacher later became my boss. So Ralph Giles, who's chief design officer at Stellantis, was actually one of my teachers, and I was actually the first student he had hired that was kind of under him. And so out of college, I had different job offers from the other companies, and it was kind of the connection with the Chrysler people that I already knew. I went in there at the time. It was Daimler Chrysler, so it was mixed when it was with the Germans, and it was definitely. I started off in advanced studios. So it was advanced. Mainly worked on things within the Jeep brand, and it was really fun to be able to just like. There was so much that I didn't know about that I like learning, and obviously learning some of the basic things like how to tape a line on a full-size clay, which is insane. Going from doing little scale models to doing full size was just amazing. And I got within the first 6 months I was there, I had a full-size model, and as an early design student, that's like a pretty cool achievement. So it was awesome to be able to do that. But then very quickly, I think some of the things that I liked about Chrysler, which really helped me in my career at Rivian, was that even though it's a big company, it was very scrappy, and you had to do a lot with a little, and you kind of had to learn how to do things on your own. And the one car that I designed as like my first car that I designed as a designer is the Jeep Grand Cherokee. Aging myself, these sketches are from 2007, I believe. So,
Are these your sketches?
yeah, they are. Yeah. So that side view is actually the sketch that basically got picked for the production car. So I got to work on that one. But it was while I was working on it, I had actually my manager at the time like slipped and fell, and unfortunately injured himself pretty bad and was out for some time. So I essentially got the opportunity, and maybe mainly because I had to, where I was the lead designer and sort of managing the program as much as I could.
How old are you at this point?
Then yeah, it probably would have been 27. Yeah, 27. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so it was really great learning experience because I learned so much about feasibility and how to put a car together and like the constraints around that and so many things that um, a lot of people, I think anyone who doesn't know in the auto industry is like the amount of regulations and they continue to get harder and harder. I was just talking about it earlier is around concept cars. Like there's a lot of concept cars that get done. I'm not a big fan of concept cars. I think they're, you know, they're cool design sort of ethos, but you're not working with any constraints. Usually don't really have much of a time constraint or a cost constraint or feasibility constraints. You know, I think they're cool as a visionary study, but to me as a designer, I love taking the constraints that you have, whether that is all those different, cost, timing, and feasibility, and really working within those to create a product.
So you go from designing the exterior concept art to becoming the chief interior design officer for Jeep. Is that correct?
Yeah.
No small feat at all, right? So in that realm, what are some of the projects that you're most proud of? Where is your indelible print on the interior of the Jeep design?
That's it. I mean, the main car that I worked on, a lot of the theme was theirs. I worked on many different cars. I think the Wrangler that came out, I think it just got refreshed before I was there. So that was one of the ones I worked at. Actually, the designer of that vehicle who did the interior actually works for me now. And actually the exterior designer of the Wrangler also works with me now. So it's like, yeah, obviously pulled some of the people that I had a connection with. So it was really fun to be able to work on, because I got to work on different brands and mainly Jeep, but also designed a Chrysler 200 during that time period. And it was just a stark difference where I learned a lot about the importance of brand and how much that has an effect on a car, or any product, honestly. So
Perfect segue, because Jeep and Chrysler both have a very strong brand DNA, right? Very well established, iconic. But when designing for a legacy brand, what design constraints do you find yourself having to operate within when also speaking to the evolution of the brand, consumer loyalty, and ultimately what's expected in the evolution of a new car from one of these companies?
yeah, actually Chrysler has like some brand identity, but I think it was a little bit more open. I think it's been a challenge on that one when I worked on that product, kind of saying like what's the new face, and you're trying to design some of that, which was actually challenging to figure out. Is like a brand that has a DNA, a sort of a classic history and is well known, but you're trying to evolve it. Was actually really challenging versus something like Jeep, where it's got a very established brand and you're just pushing it forward. And it's like, all right, it's like some of the main things is, it's got a 7-slot grille, it's got trapezoidal wheel flares, and then other than that, like it's up for grabs. It's got this DNA of being off-road capable, which gives you things like, aggressive departure and approach angles. So some of that's already in that. It makes it a lot, I don't want to say easier, but it kind of is, because you have something good and solid to build off of, versus like something like Chrysler when you're trying to enter in a new segment, but they're trying to stay loyal to like what the brand ethos is actually a lot more difficult.
Before you got to Jeep, were you an off-road enthusiast at all, or was this like a very new kind of space for you to learn?
No, it was definitely something new for me, and we had a lot of fun going like a lot of the Moab trips where it was just fun to be able to go out there. The previous head of design for Jeep, Mark Allen, we'd create these Easter Jeeps, and then they were like these super tricked out like one-off Jeeps, and then we'd go and basically go out to Moab and have a bunch of fun with these things. And it's like looking back on it, it was such an amazing opportunity, not just to be able to drive off road, but just to be able to like the team building beside it. And it was like some of the funnest memories I had there for sure.
Amazing. So in 2017, you make the big leap. You join Rivian, which at the time was a startup EV company. At that point in your career, what made you decide to make the move?
So there was when I joined, there was roughly around 120, 130 people at the company. It was very small. I knew of Rivian just because in the Detroit area, it's kind of you know all the companies there. I had really no interest in joining a startup. It was actually a friend of mine that a guy named Rob Williams, who I used to work with at Chrysler, and then he left and went to Nike. Got in contact with RJ and said, "Hey, give me a call." And was like, "Hey, you got to meet with up with RJ." There's a thing. I'm just like, I don't know. I'm not super happy about like, I'm not unhappy where I am rather, and I don't know if I really make a job. He's like, just meet with him. And after meeting with RJ, it was like it was just really cool to hear him talk about his vision for the future and talk about the importance of electrification, and just it was one of the things that I didn't see the company I was at was really kind of looking at those things. The other thing too, I got to a point in my career where I was just actually, so I just heard Sophia talking about it, which is I really relate to as well, is that for me as a designer, if I don't feel like I'm learning, I feel like I'm dying. And it was the first time in my career that I felt at that time where I could kind of see what the next 20 years look like for me. And that really scared me. That really scared me. It's like I could just kind of ride this thing out and just, keep kind of doing the same thing and do the next Grand Cherokee. And like what I was actually working on when I was doing that. And this idea of being able to start something new, start something from scratch, to help build a brand was really intriguing. But honestly, a big part of it was just RJ. Like I saw him and I'm just like, all right, this guy's gonna be successful whether he does this or makes toasters. And I thought to myself, what am I gonna do if I do this and it fails, or I don't do it and it succeeds and I'm not there? Which one's gonna bother me more? And I said, you know what, I can't not take a chance and do this.
So you're helping to define a brand from the ground up. Where do you begin with that blank canvas as it translates into an automobile?
Well, yeah, when I came in, there was already the notion it's like we wanted to do a truck and an SUV. RJ's vision was if you look at, and obviously things are changing, but if you look at tradition, I think Tesla was obviously the first one that broke the mold, and with the Model S is saying, look, like an EV doesn't need to be this small sort of economy type vehicle, and you can make something aspirational. And, part of RJ's goal was is like he loved cars growing up, but he's like, but he also didn't like what they were doing to the environment. And if you think of the biggest segments in the United States, it's the trucks and SUVs. So how could you give the customer something they want, but like without the guilt and be able to provide something that is highly capable, but also is something that is more sustainable. So that was there. It was really interesting because when we were working on the brand, we were trying to define what the product was going to be. We knew that much. It was a really fun play that looking back on it between, me coming from Jeep and like understanding a truck needs to have a certain amount of capability and strength to it so people will take it seriously, especially from people that are like know what a truck stands for. But then RJ's push for like the brand needs to be inviting. Like that's a big thing he always said is like inviting. So if you look at the face of the car, I hope you guys all agree it's very inviting. Like everything about our brand, we want it to be that way. And it was sort of this push between me coming from Jeep, wanting it to be this a little bit more capable, aggressive off-road. Like we didn't even know we wanted to be an off-road brand at the time. And I wouldn't even say we're an off-road brand strictly, but more of an adventure vehicle. And then RJ really pushing on like it being like technology focused and being, innovative and inviting that, him pushing in one direction, me pushing in another. I think we ended up in a place that, I'm at least happy where we landed.
Well, I mean, that's actually a perfect segue because I was curious if the mission of the company informs the design or does the design ultimately shape the mission of the company? But it sounds like in the case of Rivian, those two things intersected rather perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think having that vision that like RJ set out for the business, and obviously we changed certain things. I think back in the day he did a sports car. That was before I was there. But really looking at like what is the values of the company, what are we trying to achieve, and then letting that influence the product, and then now we're letting the product sort of influence on the other direction as well.
So when you look at the R1T and the R1S, what are you most proud of?
I would say, and this is probably the most controversial part of it, I'm most proud of the front end. When you're trying to design a truck or an SUV, like, especially a truck market. So we were one of the first ones that showed like a, electric truck, and there's been a whole wave of them since then. It's like the way that trucks communicate their power and their strength is through a big grill. Like you look at these cars out there, especially these trucks, like they look like they'll eat small children just by standing there. And it's like, that's not what we wanted to do, and we don't need a big grill, but we still do. So it's the reason it's got a very vertical front end, a horizontal hood. But we wanted something from the face that was instantly recognizable, something that if you didn't see the car, you could draw, even if you don't have an artistic ability, or something that I always like to think too is like what I think is in good design and good industrial design is like, can I look at it, turn my face, walk away, and still remember it? And if you can do that, I think you're onto something. And I think we nailed that with the front end. And it's like I get people to say, I don't love it. I'd totally buy the car if those headlights didn't look like that. You know, it's even my own dad, ironically, said to me, he's just like, when he saw it in person, he's like, never, of course, not going to hold back. He's like, oh, he goes, oh, the headlights look way better in person. I was like, okay, thanks, Dad. That was the first time he saw it. But I think with anything design, you have design tension. And if you're pushing and trying to do something new and different, it'll have that. But I've heard so many people as well being like, oh, I really like this growing on me, or I like it. And there's people who love it off the get-go. But it's the one area where I think we really pushed. And it was inspired actually by something we had on our CMF table, on our color materials table. We had a carabiner that was on the table, and we liked it for the anodized aluminum finish that was on there. And then another designer had this idea is like, well, what if you had this carabiner type hook on the edge of the hood that you could use as a tie down point for a kayak? And we saw that, and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And then I was just looking at it, I'm like, what if we blew that up and make it the headlight? And we did it, and we're just like, actually, that's super cool. And that's how the front end came about.
Were there a number of iterations of that before you hit the aha moment? Or
Yeah, there was quite a few different ones. Like I said, you're trying to define a brand, and none of them felt like they were ownable. And actually, the front end basically was just a horizontal light bar. And if you look, like we designed this in like 2017, if it would have come out and like came out in 18, still would have been modern then. But now, if you think about how many cars come out there that just have a horizontal light bar, you guys could probably think of a few. I'm glad we at least came up with something that was a little bit more distinctive.
so every great design has its quirks. Are there any hidden details, Easter eggs, or features within the Rivian lineup that make you particularly smile?
I like how we use our gear card, and it's one of those things. It's like I can't think of another car company that has some fuzzy character to communicate like the brand and has a kind of a mascot, and it communicates the playfulness of our brand and things that we don't take ourselves too seriously. Like this guy shows up in the back of the car, so when the kids are on the lock screen, if they tap, gear guard will come out and give kind of a friendly wave. And we will continue to do little Easter eggs like this that I think that are just kind of really, really fun. But I also love little nerdy details. Like one of the ones that I love talking about, which is something that I think customers will appreciate. Maybe some of them don't even notice. So like on our new premium interior, our Ascend interior, we have little bits of plaid everywhere, like on the back of the grab handles, which you don't see right away, and little headrest bezels. And they're kind of like, I like to say it's kind of like you have a really nice sports jacket, but then you got a really cool pattern on the inside or color, and it's only for you. It's not for everyone else. But we want an extra little step. So on our door mat pockets, they're expandable. So you kind of pull on them and they expand. Well, on that interior trim, the little elastic bands that expand out there are plaid. Nobody will ever notice it,
Oh, wow.
but it's just something that I was like, talks to the CMF team. It's like, we should really do this. And it's that thing that I hope a customer looks at one day is when they're cleaning it out and they're pulling it. They're like, oh, that's cool. I didn't notice that.
We were talking about this upstairs with our chair of undergrad game design about the use of Unreal Engine kind of within the software that runs within the Rivian, but it allows you to constantly update, refresh, and renew the user experience. Is that something unique to Rivian, or is that something that you saw as a trend in the industry and you thought, yes, we need to get in front of this?
You mean specifically on Unreal?
Yes.
I wouldn't say. I mean, a big part of our software is being able to update the car. I mean, there's essentially in other than China's that's been really leading this. There's like two car companies really that can do that. Is us and Tesla. So, I mean, it's a huge competitive advantage for us. It's also why Volkswagen just invested $6.5 billion for us to help them with software. So that's a major part of our brand is this like software defined vehicles. But on the Unreal front, one of the biggest reasons we wanted to do it was, well, one, you could have fun with interactivity, but with the way we designed it, if you've ever played around with our drive modes, is we actually were inspired by like Japanese manga, or like you think about Studio Ghibli and like sort of optimistic nature of that. Because if you look at, and there's other cars that have done Unreal before or highly realistic renderings of the vehicle, and I just felt like, what's the point of having a highly realistic photo of the vehicle when you're in the vehicle? It's kind of like holding a picture of the car while you're sitting in the car.
Right.
Like you already know what it looks like. So why not have something that's a little bit more ownable? So we spent a lot of time and we to create this world that was generated in Unreal that was all done, and it's something we call cell shading, which is just like, if you know how old cartoons were done in the past, animations were done with cell shading. And it's actually a lot harder to take a tool that's designed to make things look realistic, to make it look like a sketch. But then we were able to do cool little animations, like, you tap on the screen and you can rotate it. The little blades of grass that move, or the clouds are moving. But really, we had fun with it. But the main reason for it, which is that it actually made the system a lot easier for us to run and a lot less work for my team. And the reason I say that is, um, we're one of the only brands that if your vehicle shows up in the UI, it's your vehicle. It's the same color, it's the same model, same wheels, same like trim. Like we make it match exactly. So before we were using Unreal, any instance of the vehicle, we had to render out, and it's literally, if you think about it, thousands of images that all needed to be stored on the drive of the car, because you're not going to like load up different ones. And obviously the software team, they'd load up depending on the configuration, what image you had. But that also meant if we updated the car, we now had to update all these images, which is just a ton of manual work. That's why you'll see most automotive brands, they have one image in there. It's a neutral color. It doesn't change. So for us, we wanted that because we thought it was a cool feature. So, but like, cataloging thousands of images is a ton of bandwidth, a ton of work. So with Unreal, it's basically redesign it, you put in a script, you change color, and it updates everything. So it actually made us more efficient.
That's amazing. So speaking of like the way that you're innovating with technology, how do you and your team continue to innovate in an industry that is evolving at this point at almost hyperspeed, from the electrification to autonomy in design and sustainability and trying to reduce carbon footprint? You're at the leading edge of so many spaces in a very competitive industry. How do you stay ahead of the competition?
We like, even just how my team gets inspired is like, we do, especially when you think about things like color and materials, is like not looking at the auto industry for inspiration. Like, it's good to know what the auto industry is doing, for just so you understand, like, hey, okay, to be competitive, but also what not to do, honestly, so you can differentiate yourself. But even when we're developing certain materials, we'll look in like fashion and like and other, the types of brands that our customers are using, to draw inspiration from that, to sort of push what we can do from a material standpoint, and also push what we can do from sustainability. I'll use sustainability as an example. My team came up, actually Farshad here somewhere in the crowd helped us out, or he's over there. He's like, he's a designer, and Chris Brown, they're from our sustainability, they help out there. And it's like, I would say Farshad is a designer, but he's almost more of an engineer. He is on the design team, which helps us with a lot of these things and works very closely with the engineering team. But we have this great sort of image board where we kind of explain, and they bought a bunch of different shoes. One is like, the Adidas Allbirds, which talks about, the lowest carbon footprint. Or we have like the Nike Space Hippie, which is this completely, you can take it apart in a bunch of different pieces, which means you can recycle each one. Or we have a monomaterial based shoe that's like, that means the entire thing is sustainable, or one that's biodegradable. And when you talk about sustainability, everybody thinks recycled content, but there's so many different areas of sustainability and what story you want to tell. So for us, we know there's a lot to chew in there, and we try to, each version we do, we try to continue to improve off of that and say like, all right, this is what we did with this version. What are we going to do with the next, and how do we keep evolving it? And it's one of those areas where having great collaboration with engineering is a ton of fun. But the area that we spend a lot of time on is what I talked about, is what do we do from the software? Like, we're constantly working on that. And it's such a fun part of my job, because when you work on a car, the life cycle of that is, 3 to 4 years. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of investment. but we'll work on a software feature and 4 weeks later it's in the car.
Yeah.
And it's just awesome to see that the car you own today won't be the car you own tomorrow. And we take a lot of feedback from customers, and customers love to engage. So our head of software, Wasim Bensad, like we call him Chief Reddit Officer, because he goes into Reddit and responds to a lot of the comments. And it's like there was one funny thing here that we had. So when you lock our car, it has a chirp. So we made it literally like a bird chirp, which is like sounds like a traditional alarm where it'd go chirp chirp, but we did it with a bird chirp, which a lot of people liked. And then for Halloween, we did an owl hoot. And there was a petition on Reddit where people were like, bring back the hoot. And there was like all these people that like signed this petition to bring it back. So we put it in the car, and then we just made it a day and night mode. So you could change it. So at day it does the bird chirp, and at night it does the hoot. And it was one of those things that it's just like, it was awesome to be able to engage the customers in a way that I don't think other brands can do, which really makes it like build a lot of brand loyalty, which is really what you're trying to do.
Reddit is a slippery slope.
Yeah, it definitely is.
So let's fast forward. What excites you about the future of the Rivian brand, and where do you see automotive design heading in the next decade?
Yeah, I actually think we're in a really interesting place right now in the automotive industry. Just usually the way that things evolve is like, when does something come into play is usually when the technology changes. And now with the technology changing, with EVs, with autonomy, and how is that going to continue to evolve the actual vehicle and what we say is typical from a design standpoint. Even just some of the things we can do from storage solutions, like if you've played around with our R1T, our gear tunnel, massive front trunk, there's these things that you could approach from a design standpoint you never could have done with an ICE vehicle that really unlocks. And at Rivian right now, it's really fun because we're still just defining our product. We're not that old of a company. And for example, it was about a year ago, we revealed our R2 and R3 here, which is those vehicles over there. And when we did R2, we knew that we were going to do this car. And it was one of those ones where it's like, take an R1S, make it smaller, make sure it feels like a Rivian, and make it more affordable. That was the obvious thing for us to build. And for a lot of people, that might be most people might even be the first time they see a Rivian or the first time they experience a Rivian. But then when we showed R3, we strategically showed them at the same time to show how the brand could flex, because a lot of the comments and things I was reading online is like rumors was like, oh, Rivian's going to show the R2 and an R2T, a truck, like automatically thinking the next thing we're going to do with a truck. And it was cool to see, R3, where we took this sort of, I like to call it the design brief was like soul of a rally car. And it's cool to see like actual car enthusiasts, like, really love the car, which is just awesome. Like one of the things I was really proud of is, Top Gear magazine in the UK gave us award for best design of the year, which is amazing. We don't even sell cars in Europe yet, and to get like a European publication that I grew up watching and like loved to give fanfare for the car was just exciting. And I think that's the fun part of our brand, is the ability that we still have an ability to shape it, and how we could do something like this sort of soul of a rally car with R3, but then also do a truck, and they still feel distinctly Rivian.
That's great to know that you're a Top Gear fan also. One of the best shows on television.
Yes, of course.
So for the creatives amongst us who are seeking to inspire every day, you've had a dream career already, but what continues to inspire you and make you curious? What drives Jeff on a daily basis?
I was actually just talking to Sophia again. One of the things that she said that I absolutely loved is I always want to be learning. I really feel like if you're not learning, you're dying. And that was a thing that actually made me want to like leave my last job, I was unhappy. Is like I felt like I wasn't learning. And now at Rivian, I get to work on so many different things and like different parts of the brand, and whether that's working on all the way from working on sustainability to designing websites. And it's the idea of being able to work on so many different things and learning. And I think I honestly say for designers especially, and it doesn't matter what design discipline you're in, I truly in my heart believe a good designer can design anything. Now, they might not be the best at everything, and they might be better in certain areas, but keeping an open mind and not limiting your abilities based off of like what you think you are as a designer, because good designers are ones that really understand that, like, look, I've got a problem to solve. how I'm going to solve it and what tools can I use to solve those. And as long as you go in with that curiosity, I really think that you can work on any discipline and be successful.
So, for the young students that are in the room amongst us, what advice would you give them if they're seeking to have a career in design as impactful as your own?
Um, I know it's cliche, but work your ass off. Like, think it's really honestly, I don't know how else to say it. It's just like, I was just talking about this earlier. I even remember in like art school, it was, depending on what you want to do, but it was this idea, and I think it plays for everything. As one of my chair of industrial design said, is like your first 10,000 sketches are garbage. So you just got to get those out, because then after that, they'll be good. But I think that works for everything. It's just like practice, like through more ideas you can do, the more things you can do, the better you'll get at it. And it just sounds like kind of common sense, but really it is true. It's like a muscle, like, and it's different. It's like design is not like riding a bike. I don't think like it's a muscle you have to exercise. If you don't, you'll lose it.
So it's not something that you ever forget. It's something you must constantly be evolving.
Absolutely.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for the inspiration, for the wisdom, and for the behind the scenes look at how design, innovation, and functionality all converge into this beautiful art that we call mobility. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Jeff Hammond.